flood zones.
Al, what do you think from a meteorological point of view makes the most sense in terms of Hoosiers trying to keep themselves safe and away from a situation where they end up having a flooded home or flooded land?
First of all, they have to recognize that Mother Nature is going to be Mother Nature. The river is going to take what the river is, and I would not build in the lowest part of the river. And we may have overstepped our bounds in some of those areas and taken out too many wetlands and whatever. Indiana, before it was settled, was a big wetland state. And we may have to put some of those back so that we can not have to fight this it seems like every other year. 2008 was a year where we had a lot of floods also. It started in January, February, March, June, September, and I even think the end of the year. I'm not saying that's going to happen this year, but sometimes we just can't control everything, so we have to give back a little bit.
Don, what are you seeing from farmers? What are the people in the Farm Bureau that you talk to doing to try to keep themselves safe and keep their crops and their livelihoods safe?
Well, basically, since the mid-'80s, we've not been able to build new levees in floodplains. The levees that are in existence, as someone said earlier, were built mainly after the 1937 flood that was a record-setting flood. And so those levees have been in place for a number of years. Some of them have deteriorated. They need to be upgraded to today's engineering standards to do that. But a lot of property values of agriculture land is based on having levees there. Farmers pay taxes on those levees to maintain them, to keep them in place. And quite frankly, river bottom, silt loam land is the most productive land that we have in Indiana. So it's very important that those that are in existence and those areas that have been established as farmlands, we'd like to see them kept that way. But I think the point that we shouldn't add additional diking or levees in the process is something we really don't need.
Well, let me ask about that. I'm curious why the both of you think that's the case. I mean, we talked a little bit earlier about how establishing these lakes, Mr. Cable said, helped to mitigate flooding, especially along the Ohio River. Could you have more man-made lakes? Could you reestablish the levee structure? It seems like you would create jobs in the short term by doing that. It seems like in the long term you might help to mitigate flooding in the state. You're going to have to explain to me why these are bad things.
Well, if you look at the state of Indiana and how we've urbanized so much over the past really 20, 30 years, we poured a world of concrete and blacktop. And so that water that used to soak in or get retained in wetlands is now gone. And you can drive across any urban area, Indianapolis, for instance, and a tremendous amount of wetland conversion have not been prevented. And so those temporary water holding areas that we used to count on that slowed the water getting to the rivers are now gone. So when you have all these impervious surfaces out there, I think it's increasing the amount of flooding we've had. And so that's why it's important that the wetlands we do have, that we take care of them and make sure that we preserve them.
Arvin, your thoughts on why building is maybe something we should think twice about?
Well, Don makes a good point. He certainly does. Anytime you increase impervious areas, you're going to increase flooding. But once again, I like to use the common sense approach here, Alex, and by taking structures out of the floodways, I mean, it automatically eliminates those redundant flooding events that take place to those structures. It certainly takes the risk away from responders who have to go in there and save people who refuse to leave their homes. So once again, I think we need to draw a happy medium here. I think we need to get the structures out of the flood-prone areas, and I think we also need to take some engineering looks at our flooding too and make some good, wise decisions.
Let me toss this question into Dave Cable in our WFIU studios. Mr. Cable, what are your thoughts about, especially where the Army Corps of Engineers, who would perhaps do some of this construction I'm positing here, what are your thoughts about the necessity to do that, and your thoughts on what Don and Arvin have said about maybe why we shouldn't be doing any more construction?
Well, I have to agree that the wetlands are obviously a good nature's way of doing things. You might not expect somebody representing the Corps of Engineers to pursue that. But Mother Nature has learned over a lot longer than we have how to prevent some of the flooding, and basically the wetlands act as a sponge. And when you fill those sponges in, then that water's got to go somewhere. So I think, you know, and the Corps is involved with creation of new wetlands or replacement wetlands in various places. There's what they call mitigation banking, so when you lose some where they are constructing, you gain some in other areas. And again, below like Patoka Lake, they're in the process of, along the Patoka River, that they're trying to make the Patoka River refuge. And a lot of that area has been farmed over the years, but there are areas that also there that flood. And as farmers decide that maybe that's not their best route, the federal government is purchasing some of that property to let it revert back. And similar situations are happening around the country. And again, that's kind of like the Everglades in Florida, trying to revert back what we did back in the 30s, which was to convert some of the wetlands into areas so that people could construct. But now we're finding that maybe that's not the best thing to do.
All right, you three have converted me. You can't build your way out of it necessarily. But let me try to end this on sort of an up note. I'm curious what each of you is seeing about some perhaps new or innovative ways that people are thinking about to maybe prevent flooding or to stop it when it happens. We've seen approaches that are not just fill as many sandbags as you can and throw them on the riverbank during this year's round of flooding. I'd like to go down the line, starting with Don, and find out, what are you hearing? Are there people who have some new and interesting ideas that might be beneficial to Hoosiers down the line?
Well, farmers have adopted no tillage as one of their primary methods today, where we don't do any tillage at all. We remember farmers plowing and disking. Well, we don't do that anymore. That we put cover crops on our land to, one, protect us from soil erosion, but it also slows runoff on certain areas to do that. And so in these areas where we do have floods, hopefully there is some cover crops in place before the flood gets there. I think that's very, very important that we do that. I think farmers are very conscious of that. And then I want to also point out, even though we are behind, Indiana farmers, as farmers all across the country, are very resourceful, and we get owls 7 days in a row of some sunshine here. I think farmers are going to be working 24/7, if not longer, to get this crop put in the ground.
Hey, in just a couple of seconds, each of you gentlemen, first Al, new and different things that you're seeing in 10 seconds?
Well, I encourage people to join on our Kokoross site, report in these unusual rain events so we can have them archived.
All right, Arvin, real quick, anything from you?
I'm going to walk the fence on this one here. If you're going to keep it in the floodway, you can elevate your property and still enjoy the waterways.
All right. Well, thanks to you three for being here tonight. I really appreciate your insights. My thanks also to my co-host this evening, Sarah Whitmire. Sarah, thanks so much.
Thank you, Stan.
Please do send us your questions for next month's INFocus program to infocus@indiana.edu. You can also leave a comment or see portions of this program by visiting our website. That's indianapublicmedia.org/infocus. And thanks to all of you who watched or listened. Have a nice night.
Production support for INFocus is provided by Hoosier Energy, providing electricity for Central and Southern Indiana electric cooperatives and their member customers. Information at hepn.com, and by viewers like you. Thank you.